Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about A Star is Born from 2018. When you look at the story of A Star is Born, whether it's from the original from 1937 to the 50s version to the 70s one to this one, even though it is a story about Hollywood or the music industry, fame and being an artist and rising and falling fame and all that, it's essentially a story about two people and that relationship. And if that doesn't work, the movie doesn't work. You have to believe that that person who is rising can be famous and can be successful, and you need to believe that that other person before was successful, but at the same time you need to believe in their relationship and you need to love that relationship, because that's the core of the movie. And that's what this version really gets right, and I think what Bradley Cooper as a director does really well. In some ways this movie is in a weirder position than all of the others, because at the time of those there was like Hollywood dramas that like did well and stuff, and A Star is Born is a studio movie, but it's a studio drama in 2018 that plays like a big populist drama. In some ways, in a modern context, I almost want to compare it more to TV, like something like This Is Us or something like that, where you like really believe in this relationship, like you want to follow it, almost in a gossipy way, almost in a leering way, but in a way that you really care for it. And a lot of what Bradley Cooper's doing is kind of showing like it does feel like a film, like they don't make them like they used to kind of thing. It feels like a film from the 90s in terms of how it's made and so forth. But I think that's honestly what's smart about it, because it kind of interprets it as like, well, if you were going to make a big studio drama in 2018, what would it look like? And the answer is, I mean, this movie, basically, because that's what this became. It's a smart way to interpret it. If he had done it in kind of a more interesting indie style, that would feel like kind of the typical thing you're supposed to do. This feels like no one's really doing this. In a way, it's sort of more unique than it might get credit for necessarily. I did find, since it's so into that relationship, sometimes context is not something this film is really heavy on. You don't really understand Jackson Maine, who formerly used to be Norman Maine, but I guess is Jackson Maine in this version, played by Bradley Cooper. You don't really understand his fame, how people know him. You know that people know him. You know certain songs are very popular of his. You don't really get like, when did he start being famous? How long has he been touring? Like, was there a big album of his? It's not like something like Pop Star or Spinal Tap or even Get Him to the Greek, where you understand kind of their fame and what made them famous and why they're in the position they are now. In A Star is Born, you're just like, he's famous and he tours and people know he's famous and like everyone knows who Jackson Maine is, and you're like, oh, okay. And there's like one part where he mentions something a little specific and you get the point where he's been doing it since around 94, but that's about as far as you get. At first that bothered me, but I think as I was watching I understood what's important about this film is that relationship, and getting more into those other sort of details would have been a bit too messy. So I ultimately understand why he didn't do that, but it did sort of bug me. I'm like, so what is the deal with this guy? I don't know. The other essential part of any Star is Born is really the rising star, and Lady Gaga is really very good at that. She reminds me of, Janet Gaynor, Judy Garland, and I haven't actually seen the 70s one, but whatever, before her. You really have to steal the show. You really have to show great range, great poise, a great change in this character's life. You have to kind of make the audience fall in love with you. It's a kind of a best actress turn, and other than the Streisand one I didn't see actually, the other ones were kind of like big Oscar nominated kind of things, so it totally makes sense to have this kind of powerhouse performance. I have only seen her in like Machete Kills and like some ads for those American Horror Story things. She seemed very over the top in those. She plays more of the young ingenue, very genuine. She's incredible at it, particularly obviously with the singing and acting with those parts, but I think she's also good at showing like things like having little Easter eggs where she's writing in the parking lot and she moves her arms out like this, and then when she's singing she does that again on stage, and it's like, that's a cute character moment, but that's also something so essential to understanding like this is what the character does when she sings this thing. She raises her arms, and you might think that's stupid, but in some ways it's like knowing your friend and go, oh yeah, when my friend eats a cheeseburger he always eats it this way, or something, something like that. When you know these specific things about your friends, and having that kind of shared thing as an audience makes you a lot more comfortable and makes you love them more. One of the things about this relationship between her and Bradley Cooper, and since it's so essential to the film, is the film spends almost too much time on the kind of getting to meet them sequences ending on her singing Shallows, and the film does kind of rise and rise and almost feels like this perfection up until then. In that way, his kind of theory of being more just about them and almost from their perspective, like you don't really know how the public views their relationship. You don't really know how the media coverage is covering Allie or Jackson Maine or anything like that. You just know that they are famous. In that point, it feels very intimate. It feels like you're right there and feels perfect. I think it doesn't necessarily work the whole time, because sometimes you're like just having little bits of things, and this does feel like, you know, a first-time director, which is what Bradley Cooper is in this case, but it feels like one who understands what at the core of his movie is the most important, which is essentially why this movie works, is because if you understand what is the most important about what the story you're telling is, you're not going to veer off in other directions and start to lose the audience. And you don't really lose the audience with a film like this. You have the audience with you, much like kind of a drama of a successful TV show where people want to talk about it in their office. And I feel like A Star Is Born actually had that quality to it. And those opening scenes, I think, are the most basic essence of that theory, basically, is that you have them hanging out, you have their relationship, you understand why they're falling in love with each other. And it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's fun and it's thrilling, and seeing her do the thing with the Shallows, it almost feels like you could really just end the movie right there, because you're like, this is amazing and beautiful, but the Star Is Born story must continue. You know, you have other things like Sam Elliott playing his brother. A lot of people have commented on the meta joke of the idea that Bradley Cooper is doing kind of a Sam Elliott impression, and then Sam Elliott, in an argument with him over something else, says, "You basically stole my voice," which is kind of funny. I liked everyone from the British manager, who I don't really know who that was, and Dave Chappelle showing up, and Andrew Dice Clay was alright. I also like that William Wellman got a screen credit, as I'm a huge William Wellman fan, because he wrote the original Star Is Born. I find this film to be just a great populist studio film, and in that I think that's maybe why people are over liking it, because it's so unique in itself. If this had come out in the 90s or in the 2000s, when like these were things that happened, it'd be like less notable because there'd be more of these, but because this is so rare and does work actually fairly well, it becomes even more notable than it has any real right to be. Is it a good movie? You know, it's fine and an entertaining one. I don't think it really got to my soul or anything. There's certain parts that like really I thought were shocking, like when he, you know, calls her ugly and stuff. Like that felt like such a betrayal based on our relationship, and it kind of is so good with character in those moments. I think it drags you through all that relationship stuff. It does that because that's kind of the most it has to offer. You know, it does have great performances in it and everything like that. I don't necessarily think it says anything about fame. I don't think any of these say as much about fame. I mean, people think they do. It's just kind of a great little story. It shows kind of the circle of lifeness of fame and the jealousy of artistry, and kind of has these vague visions of authenticity, which doesn't really hold a candle to anything, considering he's a white rock and roll musician, and we don't really need to get into the authenticity of that one, do we? Or the fact that most music and all music that, you know, we really like, including rock and roll and pop music, is you know, part of postmodernism, and in postmodernism acting like, you know, you have the most authentic thing is a bit of a joke in itself. You know, being an authentic artist really should just be like making art, not like coming up with what's the most original and honest and truthful and hurtful, soulful, stupid thing. But this film, again, doesn't really get into that because it's more concerned with its main theory. And I think since its main theory works in this very much like studio drama kind of way, we're with it. Bradley Cooper knows how to make a studio drama. I think if there were more of these sort of things, I think this film would probably be less notable than it is. It's just because its uniqueness, because it doesn't go too off the rails and become like Empire or something like that. We kind of want to go with it and we love to go with it, but ultimately I think it is just like kind of a fun populist thing. You wouldn't mind like laying back on the couch and getting probably way too into it, but after it's all done you're kind of like, I mean, that was kind of a fun sort of thing. It was better than it had any right to be, and that's when you're like, oh, I think we did actually sort of need that new Star Is Born in the kind of pantheon of this story and what it's doing and everything like that. I think we'll sit there and go, you know, that was a fun one, but it doesn't make me feel like the way the 37 one did or the 54 one did, where they almost feel like you didn't need to remake either of them and they were undefinable ones. You know, this just feels like a new, really good version of it. It doesn't kind of speak to the heavens like any of the other ones do, and I know that's like not a fair comparison. Ultimately, it's just a very decent studio kind of drama that works really well under its own kind of guise, and I think Bradley Cooper was smart to understand the core of what this story is. Under that, he's a smart director, because if you understand the theory and what really works and what is essentially why you like that story, then you're ready to really be a good storyteller. And that's what this film does. It's presented by someone who understands the story, and I think that's why this film works as well as it does. I don't think it's so incredible or anything that there can never be another Star is Born. I very much think there could be, especially since the artist was pretty much was one, and then, you know, we made this one a bunch of years later. So it just does feel like another kind of great riff on that story. Maybe it's the newer kind of populist kind of a riff of it, but I think maybe that was kind of the only way and the one we sort of needed at this time. And I think this film kind of harkens back to kind of the way the studio system used to be at really presenting a nice story in the best populist way they could, and us being happy to enjoy the ride. A Star is Born falls into the great Hollywood tradition and does a really good job at that. So if you've seen A Star is Born and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.